Welcome to a story that stretches across continents, through war, ambition, hatred, and love. A tale of two men born on the same day yet into utterly different worlds. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Novel Whisper Official, and comment below the title of the novel you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. The year is 1906. The world is brimming with promise for some and shadowed by despair for others. In Boston, inside a mansion adorned with carved wood panels and gilt chandeliers, a child takes his first breath. He is William Lowell Kane, heir to a banking dynasty, surrounded by soft linen and the hushed pride of a family with centuries of power behind them. His life begins in privilege, his future already sketched out in expectations of wealth, education, and leadership. To those around him, the boy's arrival seems another inevitable step in the Kane legacy, a golden link in an unbroken chain. But thousands of miles away, in the rough forests of eastern Poland, another boy is born at that very hour. His mother, poor and frail, dies in childbirth. His father is nowhere to be found. The child is nameless, naked, and abandoned, thrust into a world of hunger and cold. He is taken in by a peasant family raised on scraps of bread and hope. He will grow up with nothing, no inheritance, no protection, only a fierce will to endure. This boy will later be called Abel. The two births could not be more different, one wrapped in silk, the other in rags. One nourished by wealth, the other clawing for survival. And yet destiny has bound them together. Though oceans separate them, though their lives take opposite directions, their fates are set on a collision course that will shape everything they touch. William's early years are a portrait of refinement. Tutors teach him Latin before he can run, etiquette before he can play. His father, a stern but ambitious man, drills into him the sacred trust of the Kane name. Money is not merely wealth, it is power. And with power comes responsibility. William's world is paved in marble, but it is also a cage of expectation. The boy learns quickly that his life is not his own. It belongs to the legacy he must uphold. Abel's early years are carved in hardship. He grows up knowing hunger, his belly often empty as snow sweeps across the fields. He watches his adoptive family toil endlessly, the weight of poverty pressing on every breath. And yet, something inside him burns brighter than despair. Abel has a sharp mind, a stubborn pride, and an unshakable determination. He may be poor, but he will not be defeated. In these opening moments of their lives, neither boy knows the other exists. They will grow in parallel worlds, one shaped by privilege, the other by struggle. But beneath the surface, threads are already weaving them together. A single choice years later will draw them face to face. And when that day comes, the fire of their rivalry will burn for a lifetime. For now, the story begins with two cries on the same day, one in a gilded nursery, the other in a darkened hut. Two lives, two paths. Cain, Abel. The world tilts into turmoil as the first shadows of war creep across Europe. For Abel, childhood is not a gentle passage but a relentless struggle for survival. The peasants who raised him give what little they can, yet the boy often wanders into the forests, hunting for roots and berries, learning to read the language of nature out of necessity. His sharp eyes and quick hands keep him alive, but hunger gnaws at his bones and the bitter winds of winter cut into his skin. When war comes, it comes with a fury. German soldiers march into Polish villages, burning, taking, destroying. Abel watches homes set ablaze, friends vanish, and the little security he has shatter in an instant. In the chaos, he learns the brutal arithmetic of survival. Trust is dangerous, mercy is scarce, and the only certainty is loss. But amid this devastation, Abel's resolve hardens. He refuses to let the cruelty of the world break him. In his silence, in the clench of his fists, he vows that he will rise above the ashes. Across the Atlantic, William Kane's childhood unfolds in a different theater. His days are measured by lessons with tutors and evenings filled with his father's stern presence. Where Abel's education is in hunger and survival, William's is in finance, politics, and the nuances of power. His father takes him to the bank, lifting him onto polished oak chairs to watch men sign contracts worth millions. William learns that numbers are not just figures. They are tools that move nations, tools he is expected to master. Yet wealth does not shield him from hardship of a different kind. Illness strikes his mother, and he watches helplessly as the light drains from her eyes. In the echoing halls of the Kane mansion, William feels the first taste of loneliness, a silence that wealth cannot fill. His father, consumed by work and ambition, offers discipline rather than comfort. William grows up faster than he should, forced to shoulder the invisible weight of becoming the man his father demands. Meanwhile, Abel's war-torn childhood twists further into nightmare. Captured, imprisoned, and starved, he endures cruelties no child should face. But in the darkness of a camp, an unlikely protector appears. A kind-hearted officer who teaches him the basics of language and mathematics, sparking the flame of learning in him. Knowledge becomes Abel's weapon, his secret advantage, the tool he will one day wield as fiercely as William wields money. 2 boys, 2 worlds. One groomed for leadership, the other forged in suffering. Neither has met the other, yet the parallels in their lives grow sharper. Both are marked by loss, both carry wounds carved too young, and both are being shaped by forces far greater than themselves. What they cannot yet know is that each hardship, each lesson, each small triumph of survival and discipline is preparing them for a collision that will define not only their lives but the lives of everyone around them. The march of time brings with it moments that will shape destinies. For William Kane, it happens with the suddenness of tragedy. His father, the pillar of the family and the iron-willed guardian of the Kane fortune, dies far too soon. The boy is still young, but the world wastes no time. The mantle of responsibility shifts abruptly onto his narrow shoulders, with grief pressing on him and expectations mounting from boardrooms filled with older men. William learns that there is no pause for mourning in the world of power. He must act, decide, and lead long before he has grown into the man he is supposed to be. Guided by tutors and the quiet counsel of family allies, William enters adolescence already burdened with adult duties. Every lesson in mathematics, every lecture in politics, every hour spent studying balance sheets is no longer theoretical. It is preparation for survival in a world eager to test him. For every moment of weakness, he is reminded of the Kane name, the legacy that demands his strength. His loneliness deepens, but so too does his resolve. Across the ocean, Abel's life takes another brutal turn. War has ravaged Poland, and famine lingers like a shadow. When opportunity for escape arises, it comes at a heavy price: exile. Abel leaves behind the ruins of his homeland with little more than hunger in his belly and ambition in his heart. The journey is perilous, marked by cramped ships, the stench of poverty, and the silent prayers of those desperate for freedom. For Abel, it is not simply a voyage. It is a rebirth. Arriving in America, Abel is greeted not by open arms but by suspicion and struggle. He knows almost no English, has no money, and is forced to take menial jobs. Sweeping floors, carrying bricks, sleeping in cramped rooms with strangers who dream of the same distant promise. Yet even here, amid the indignities of poverty, Abel's mind sharpens. He listens to every word spoken around him, practicing new phrases, observing the habits of the wealthy men who pass through hotels and banks. To him, America is not just a land of freedom. It is a chessboard, and he is determined to learn the game. Meanwhile, William ascends to Harvard, where privilege surrounds him, but competition is fierce. The sons of other dynasties walk the same halls, each one a rival in intellect, ambition, and charm. William discovers the subtler challenges of life: envy, betrayal, friendship, and first love. His mind grows sharper, his presence more commanding, but the shadow of expectation never leaves him. He knows that one mistake, one weakness could undo generations of Kane prestige. Abel, still carving his way upward, begins to see America not as a place where fate is handed down, but where fate can be seized. Every injustice only hardens his will, every setback fuels his determination. His life is no longer about mere survival. It is about rising, conquering, and proving that the boy born nameless in a Polish hut can stand shoulder to shoulder with the kings of finance and power. Two men, still unaware of each other, are already shaping themselves into forces of destiny. One inherits power and learns how to wield it. The other claws his way toward power and dreams of building it. Their worlds are moving closer, and the collision, though still unseen, grows inevitable. The Atlantic had swallowed weeks of Abel's life, tossing him among seasick bodies crammed into the bowels of a ship. When he finally glimpsed the Statue of Liberty, it wasn't just a monument. It was a promise. America, land of dreams, land of second chances. But as he stepped onto the crowded docks of New York, the truth struck him. Promises meant nothing unless you fought for them. Abel had no family, no money, not even proper shoes. He began with the dirtiest jobs, hauling coal, washing dishes, sweeping the filth of streets that never seemed to sleep. Every coin earned was survival, but every face he saw, the bankers with polished shoes, the gentlemen stepping into carriages, fueled a silent vow. One day, he would stand among them. He learned English word by word, night after night, repeating phrases until his tongue stopped stumbling. Hunger sharpened his focus, and humiliation hardened his spirit. Where others saw endless obstacles, Abel saw training. Each insult endured, each locked door became another reason to push forward. His break came in the world of hospitality. A hotel offered him work as a bellboy. Though the hours were long and the pay meager, Abel had something more valuable than wages: proximity. Here he could observe the powerful, study their habits, listen to their conversations. He began to notice patterns: who tipped well, who barked orders, who smiled when no one watched. It was a silent education in ambition, manners, and influence. Meanwhile, in Boston, William Kane walked marble corridors where his professors lectured on economics and politics. At Harvard, his world widened. He argued philosophy late into the night with fellow students, debated financial theories with professors, and tested his strength against men just as ambitious as he was. Yet even among equals, William stood apart. His upbringing had trained him to measure not just ideas but their consequences, not just wealth but its weight. Still, William's life was not immune to personal struggle. Friendships frayed, romances kindled and faded. He discovered betrayal for the first time, when someone he trusted proved false. Privilege could open doors, but it could not shield him from human pain. These lessons, though quieter than Abel's hardships, carved their own deep lines into his character. For Abel, years of hard work built a foundation. His quick mind and relentless discipline caught the eye of mentors who saw more than a laborer. Step by step he rose, from bellboy to assistant, from assistant to manager. The hotel world became his kingdom in miniature. He learned to negotiate contracts, to balance accounts, to anticipate the desires of wealthy guests before they spoke them. Each success fed his hunger for more. Abel had arrived in America with nothing but the clothes on his back. Now he had a vision. Not just to survive, but to build an empire. He would carve his name into the very fabric of the country that had once treated him as invisible. William, too, stepped closer to power. As he graduated and entered the Kane Bank, he found himself not merely a young man, but an heir stepping into command. The weight of responsibility pressed heavier than ever. Decisions now moved money, money moved lives, and lives moved nations. For William, success was no longer a dream, it was an expectation. The stage was set. On one side, a self-made immigrant clawing his way upward. On the other, a scion of wealth striving to prove worthy of his inheritance. Two men, two paths, both hungry, both unyielding. Their orbits had not yet crossed, but gravity was pulling them closer. The city lights glittered like 1,000 opportunities, and Abel Rosnovski, for at last he had claimed a name of his own, was determined to seize them. He poured every ounce of his will into the hotel business, transforming what had once been chance employment into a vocation. He was tireless, studying ledgers by night, negotiating with suppliers by day, and watching every move of the wealthy patrons who streamed through his lobbies. Where others saw only fleeting guests, Abel saw patterns of power. He came to understand not just what people wanted, but why they wanted it, and how to deliver it before they even asked. His empire began humbly. A single struggling hotel he was bold enough to take over when others abandoned it. With sweat and cunning he revived it, polishing floors, retraining staff, and drawing in clientele with impeccable service. Success bred opportunity. One hotel became several, each a stepping stone toward something larger, a chain that bore his mark. Abel had risen from an abandoned hut in Poland to become a man whose name carried weight in America's growing world of luxury and commerce. Yet beneath his victories burned an old flame, a hunger to prove himself not just to the world but to fate itself. At the same time, William Kane was climbing his own ladder, though his rungs were made of polished oak and gilded steel. Inside the Kane Bank, he learned the mechanics of high finance. Numbers were his battlefield. Investments, loans, mergers. His decisions could shape industries, and each success confirmed that he was not merely a son born to inherit, but a man destined to expand the Kane legacy. He developed a reputation for precision, integrity, and daring strategies that distinguished him from peers who relied only on family name, but the weight was real. Behind closed doors, William often felt the pressure pressing against his chest. Each decision was scrutinized, each success demanded another. There was no margin for failure when carrying the Kane name. Love touched both men during these years. William fell for a woman whose warmth softened the hard edges of his existence. She brought laughter into the solemn halls of his life, and in her eyes he glimpsed a future not defined solely by finance. For Abel, too, love entered quietly in the form of a woman who saw beyond his hunger for power and recognized the wounded boy who had once walked barefoot through Polish fields. Marriage and fatherhood arrived for both men, drawing tenderness from hearts often consumed by ambition. Their children became their mirrors and their motivations, reminders that their lives were not lived for themselves alone. Yet even love was shadowed by ambition. Neither man knew how to slow down, how to stop striving. William sought expansion for the bank, Abel for his hotel empire. They rose like twin flames, parallel and unconnected, yet both reaching higher and higher, each consumed by the drive to leave behind a legacy no one could erase. The irony was hidden in plain sight. Both men, so different in origin, were now united by their relentless pursuit of power. Both bore invisible scars, William from the isolation of privilege, Abel from the brutality of poverty. And both were determined never to yield. Their paths had not yet crossed, but destiny was already adjusting its course. The banker and the hotelier, heirs of two very different worlds, were approaching the moment when their lives would intertwine, and the bond forged would not be of friendship, but of enmity. The first collision came not with gunfire or shouts, but with a signature on paper. For Abel, it was the day everything changed. His chain of hotels was poised for expansion. The plans were bold, the opportunities vast, but the financing depended on one institution, Kane and Cabot Bank. Abel had built his empire brick by brick, each success wrung from sweat and risk. Now he sat across polished mahogany desks from men in tailored suits, men who represented the very establishment he had always watched from a distance. He presented his case with passion and precision, every number balanced, every projection carefully crafted. Abel knew his vision was sound. But the bank said no. Behind that decision stood William Kane. He saw Abel's empire as a gamble too large, a risk not worth endangering the bank's stability. For William, it was not personal. It was a calculation, a duty to protect his institution. He believed he was acting with integrity, preserving the trust of clients whose wealth depended on his caution. For Abel, it was betrayal. A door slammed in his face by the very kind of man who had always kept him outside. He walked away from the bank with his jaw set, his pride burning hotter than ever. In his heart, a seed of hatred took root, not against the faceless institution, but against William Kane himself. That hatred sharpened into obsession. To Abel, William was no longer just another banker. He was the obstacle, the embodiment of every barrier ever placed before him. He swore that one day he would not just rival Kane, but surpass him, crush him, prove that the boy born nameless in a Polish hut could rise higher than the heir of Boston's wealthiest dynasty. Meanwhile, William thought little more of the decision. To him, Abel was another ambitious businessman, perhaps too reckless, perhaps too driven by ego. He returned to the endless work of managing the bank, expanding investments, securing alliances. He did not yet realize that in saying no, he had ignited a fire that would rage for decades. Life continued, but no longer in parallel peace. The two men had crossed paths, and though they did not yet know it fully, they had become adversaries. Abel poured his fury into proving Kane wrong, finding backers elsewhere, clawing his way through obstacles with a ferocity that frightened even his allies. William, steadfast and confident, fortified his position, unaware that a storm was gathering with his name on it. The rivalry had begun. It was invisible to most, silent to the world at large, but to both men it would become the defining struggle of their lives. For Abel it was personal vengeance. For William it was duty, though in time he too would come to see the feud as something deeper, something inseparable from his own destiny. The banker and the hotelier were no longer strangers. They were opponents bound together, each man's triumph destined to echo in the other's defeat. Success did not pause for either man, even as enmity simmered beneath the surface. Both William Kane and Abel Rosnovski found their lives deepening in ways neither ambition nor hatred could deny, through love, marriage, and the fragile miracle of children. For William, love had come quietly but steadfastly. His marriage anchored him, balancing the cold steel of banking with the warmth of a home filled with laughter. He found joy in small things, holding his wife's hand at dinners, hearing the soft giggle of his child in the nursery, watching the seasons shift over the gardens of his estate. Yet even in these tender moments, the Kane legacy pressed on him like a shadow. He wanted to be more than just a custodian of wealth. He wanted to prove that he could protect his family by safeguarding the very institution that bore his name. Abel's marriage was marked by fire and devotion. His wife saw past his rough beginnings, past the hardness that ambition had carved into him, and she believed in his dreams even when others doubted. For Abel, who had once been a nameless orphan, the love of a woman and the laughter of a child were riches beyond calculation. Holding his daughter for the first time, he felt a promise bloom inside him. She would never know the hunger, the cold, the shame of poverty. Everything he built would be for her, but love and family did not silence the ambition that drove them. Both men balanced tenderness at home with relentless pursuit outside of it. William worked late into the night at the bank, studying markets, forging alliances, and maneuvering through the invisible wars of finance. Abel, just as tireless, poured himself into his hotels, negotiating contracts, envisioning expansions, and building a reputation as a man who could not be broken. Sacrifice accompanied their victories. Each missed dinner, each night spent away from home was a reminder of the price success demanded. Wives grew weary of empty chairs, children learned patience too soon. Yet neither man could stop. For William, slowing down meant risking the bank's stability. For Abel, slowing down meant slipping back into the abyss of obscurity, and through it all, the memory of their encounter lingered. For Abel, William Kane was a ghost at every triumph, a face in his mind whenever he signed a contract or cut a ribbon. Hatred sharpened even moments of joy, as if his victories mattered only in how they proved Kane wrong. William, though less consumed, could not entirely dismiss Abel's shadow either. He knew the hotelier was rising, a figure to be watched, a competitor to be measured. Two men, each blessed by love, each bound by responsibility, each burning with ambition. Their families gave them tenderness, but also new stakes, new vulnerabilities. Every empire they built was no longer for themselves alone, but for the children who carried their names. And with every step forward, the rivalry edged closer to open war, not yet declared but already inevitable. The year 1929 arrived with the shimmer of prosperity, a nation drunk on its own growth. Skyscrapers climbed higher, fortunes swelled, and optimism spilled into every corner of American life. Both William Kane and Abel Rosnovski rode that wave, though from very different vantage points. For William, the Kane and Cabot Bank thrived. His judgment had proven sharp, his strategies bold but cautious, and his reputation grew as one of the most reliable minds in finance. Investors trusted him, politicians sought his counsel, and clients entrusted their wealth with an almost reverent faith. Yet William knew how fragile prosperity could be. Behind his calm face, he worried that too much money was being poured into dreams without substance, bubbles that could burst with the prick of reality. Abel, meanwhile, expanded his hotel empire at a staggering pace. Gleaming lobbies, chandeliers that spilled golden light, kitchens that served feasts to the wealthy and powerful. His establishments became symbols of elegance. Each opening was a triumph, a new declaration that Abel had conquered another summit. He was tireless, driven by the need to build, to grow, to show the world he could not be denied. Yet with each expansion he took on more risk, mortgaging the future for the brilliance of the present. Then the crash came. In October the markets tumbled. Stock prices collapsed like a house of cards in a sudden wind. Panic spread through the streets of New York as men who had felt like kings a week earlier now clutched their heads in despair. Banks teetered, businesses fell overnight, fortunes evaporated in hours, paraded in hours, paraded in hours, paraded in hours. William fought to steady the Kane and Cabot Bank. Sleepless nights consumed him as he scrambled to protect depositors, to reassure clients, to hold back the tide of ruin. He felt the weight of every decision more than ever, for he knew that one misstep could not only destroy his institution but betray the legacy his father had entrusted to him. The crash tested every ounce of his discipline, every lesson he had absorbed about the responsibility of wealth. For Abel, the devastation was personal. Guests vanished from his hotels, debts mounted, creditors circled. He fought with a ferocity born from years of hunger. Selling assets, cutting costs, battling to keep his empire alive. The lavish lobbies and glittering chandeliers seemed to mock him now, symbols of how quickly fortune could turn to ash. Each decision was survival, each moment a struggle to stop the dream from collapsing into ruin. It was during this time that Abel's hatred of William Kane hardened into steel. He blamed the bank's refusal years earlier for leaving him vulnerable, for forcing him to scramble in desperation when stability might have saved him. Every loss, every sleepless night, every desperate negotiation seemed to trace back to that single denial. To him, Kane was not just a banker. He was the architect of Abel's suffering. And so, as the Great Depression spread its shadow across the world, both men fought their battles. William, to preserve an ancient institution. Abel to keep his young empire alive. Their struggles were different, but both were marked by the same relentless will. Neither would yield, neither would bend, and neither could yet see that the war between them had truly begun. The Great Depression ground on like an endless winter, stripping hope from cities and farms alike. For William Kane, every day at the bank was a test of endurance. Lines of anxious depositors formed outside the doors, desperate to withdraw what little remained of their savings. Rival institutions collapsed like dominoes, their failures threatening to drag even the strongest banks into ruin. William held firm, his steady hand and unflinching calm becoming a beacon in the chaos. He absorbed the fury of those who blamed financiers for their losses, yet he never allowed fear to guide his choices. Integrity was his weapon, discipline his shield. Abel fought a different war. His hotels, once symbols of luxury, now struggled to fill their rooms. Lavish dining halls echoed with emptiness and creditors hammered at his doors. But Abel had survived worse. He had endured hunger in Polish winters, humiliation as a penniless immigrant. He would not bow now. With ruthless pragmatism, he renegotiated loans, struck bargains, and clawed his way through crisis. What others called desperation, Abel called survival. But beneath Abel's resilience smoldered his obsession. He could not forgive the day William Kane's bank had refused him. To Abel, every sleepless night, every creditor's threat, every humiliation was Kane's doing. That denial had not been a single decision. It had been an insult, a dismissal of everything Abel had fought for. The bitterness grew until it became a driving force, as vital to him as ambition itself. William, though far less consumed, began to notice Abel's presence in the world of business. Reports reached him of the hotelier's ferocity, his uncanny ability to survive, his refusal to be broken. William respected the man's tenacity even as he viewed him as reckless. Yet he did not know, not fully, the depth of hatred Abel held for him. The enmity soon spilled into open competition. Whenever Kane's bank considered financing ventures connected to Abel, the decision was cool and detached. No. To William, it was prudence. To Abel, it was war. He retaliated by seeking alliances elsewhere, often paying higher costs simply to prove he could succeed without Kane. Each victory tasted sweeter when it carried the sting of defiance. Friends and colleagues on both sides began to sense the animosity. Whispers spread in boardrooms and dining clubs. Kane and Rosnovski. Two men rising like giants in their fields, bound not by partnership, but by rivalry. Where one appeared, the other's shadow followed. It was not yet an open feud in newspapers or speeches, but in the corridors of power it was understood. These men were enemies. What neither realized was how much alike they had become. Both were relentless, both carried wounds from their youth, both were building empires not merely for themselves, but for the children who would inherit them. Yet pride blinded them. Each saw only the enemy in the other, never the reflection. And so the fire of their rivalry grew, fed by ambition, sharpened by bitterness, destined to burn for the rest of their lives. The 1940s brought thunder across the world. War returned, larger and more brutal than before, and neither William Kane nor Abel Rosnovski could escape its reach. For William, the battlefield was not only the bank, but his own home. His son Richard reached the age of service. William, who had once been the boy carried into boardrooms by his father, now stood helpless as his own child marched off in uniform. He gave Richard his blessing with pride, but in the quiet hours of the night he felt the ache of a father's fear. No amount of wealth or influence could shield his son from bullets, mud, or the chance of never returning. At the bank, the war reshaped everything. Loans flowed to industries producing tanks, planes, and weapons. The Kane and Cabot Bank became an artery of the nation's survival, financing not dreams but necessities. William's days were spent poring over contracts, his nights drafting strategies that kept the institution both solvent and patriotic. Each decision was laced with weight, to support the war effort, to protect the bank, and to ensure that when peace returned, the Kane name would stand untarnished. Abel faced his own battles. His beloved daughter, Florentina, grew up in the shadow of war. Abel watched her blossom into a bright, graceful young woman, the very embodiment of the promise he had made long ago, that she would never know the hunger and humiliation he had endured. She became his pride, his anchor, the reason he fought harder than ever. But as news of battles and losses filled the airwaves, Abel feared that the war might one day reach her, stealing away the one treasure he could not replace. His empire of hotels became both a blessing and a burden. Soldiers and officers filled rooms once reserved for aristocrats and businessmen. Contracts with governments brought money but also scrutiny. Every deal was a negotiation between survival and principle. Abel's enemies saw opportunities to undermine him, and his allies were never fully trustworthy. He fought them all with the same ferocity that had carried him from the forests of Poland to the heights of American society. Yet beneath it all, the feud with William Kane remained. It was no longer a quiet hatred, but a constant undertone in both men's lives. Abel saw Kane's bank as the great wall he must someday bring down, while William viewed Abel as a reckless empire builder whose hunger threatened stability. Even in wartime, when both men faced challenges greater than themselves, their rivalry refused to rest. The war tested them as fathers as much as leaders. William feared letters edged in black, the telegrams that shattered families. Abel feared that the chaos of a world at war might undo everything he had built for Florentina. Each man carried his private terror while presenting a face of strength to the world. And as cannons thundered overseas, as blood was spilled in cities and fields far from their offices, both men fought wars of their own. Wars within, wars against each other, wars that would not end even when peace returned. Peace returned, but it did not bring rest. The scars of war lingered in boardrooms and in homes alike, and for both William Kane and Abel Rosnovski, the years that followed tested not just their ambition but their endurance. William welcomed his son Richard home, but the joy was tempered by the sight of a man forever altered. War had left shadows in his eyes, an edge to his voice, and though he carried himself with pride, William sensed the wounds no doctor could mend. As a father, he wanted to shield Richard, but as a banker, he needed his heir to be strong. That balance gnawed at him, for William knew what it meant to inherit responsibility too soon. At the bank, competition sharpened. Rivals circled like hawks, eager to wound Kane and Cabot. Allies were not always loyal, and betrayal became a familiar visitor. William fought on every front, restructuring finances, forging new alliances, and defending the institution from those who would happily see it crumble. It was a war of suits and signatures, but it drained him all the same. He lost trusted colleagues along the way, men who turned traitor for profit or power, and each betrayal left him colder, harder. For Abel, the years were no gentler. His hotels had survived the Depression, had served through the war, and now had to adapt to a new era. Travelers returned, but so did competitors. Abel's appetite for growth never dimmed, yet expansion brought risk, and risk brought enemies. Some sought to undercut his contracts, others to exploit his past. Even those he once called friends occasionally revealed themselves to be opportunists in disguise, and then came the deepest wounds of all: loss. Death crept into his circle, striking down allies who had stood by him, taking from him those few he had trusted fully. Abel, who had endured famine and brutality as a child, who had carved his place in America with blood and sweat, discovered that no empire could shield him from grief. The sight of an empty chair at his table, the echo of a familiar voice gone silent, reminded him that power could never conquer mortality. Still, the feud with Kane burned in him. Every loss, every betrayal seemed to trace back to that one man, that one decision years ago that had denied him what he believed was rightfully his. Hatred became his compass, guiding choices, fueling ambition. Even when victories came, they were never enough, for in the back of his mind lingered the face of William Kane, a reminder that the war between them was not yet won. William, too, could not escape the shadow of Abel Rosnovski. Reports of Abel's successes reached his desk again and again. Another hotel, another bold move, another triumph. He dismissed them with the coolness of a banker, but privately he felt the sting of recognition. Abel was not reckless after all. He was formidable, dangerous, a rival who refused to be broken. And so, in the aftermath of a world war, both men found themselves fighting quieter but no less brutal battles, against betrayal, against loss, against time itself, but always, beneath it all, against each other. The passing years carried an irony neither William Kane nor Abel Rosnovski could see clearly at first. While they battled one another, their children were stepping into a future tangled by a feud they had not chosen. Florentina Rosnovski grew into the young woman Abel had always dreamed she would be. Brilliant, graceful, and ambitious in ways that mirrored his own fire. She had inherited his stubborn will and his vision for a life beyond limitations. Abel adored her fiercely, often to the point of overprotection, determined that no shadow of poverty or humiliation would ever touch her. To him, she was not only a daughter, but the living proof of his triumph over fate. Richard Kane, William's son, walked a path that echoed his father's youth. Educated, disciplined, and polished by the same weight of expectation, he prepared to step into the vast responsibilities of the Kane Bank. William looked at him with pride, but also with a trace of fear, knowing too well the burden of inheriting a name before truly earning it. He wanted Richard to be strong, yet not hardened by duty as he himself had been. And then fate, with a cruel twist of poetry, brought Florentina and Richard together. It began innocently, a chance meeting, a conversation sparked by curiosity rather than history. They saw in each other not the weight of dynasties, but the light of possibility. Where their fathers carried scars, they carried dreams. Richard admired Florentina's intelligence, her sharp wit, the way she refused to bow to expectations. Florentina admired Richard's steadiness, his quiet confidence, his belief in a world larger than rivalry. But love, when it bloomed between them, was born in the shadow of a war they did not start. Neither knew at first the depth of hatred their fathers bore for one another. By the time they understood, it was too late. Their hearts were already entwined. When the truth surfaced, it struck like a storm. Abel raged at the very thought of his daughter tied to a Kane. To him, William's bloodline was poison, the embodiment of every denial, every humiliation he had endured. William, too, recoiled at the idea of his son marrying the daughter of a man he considered reckless and dangerous. Their feud, once confined to boardrooms and contracts, now invaded their homes, threatening to tear apart the very families they sought to protect. Yet Richard and Florentina were not easily swayed. Their love was not a fling, but a defiance, a declaration that the sins of fathers would not dictate the hearts of children. They dreamed of a future together, even as their families wove walls of hatred between them. Generations had collided. What had begun as a rivalry between two men was now a curse passed to their children. And though neither William nor Abel would yield, destiny had already set the stage. Love and hatred were bound together, entwining the Kanes and the Rosnovskis in a drama that neither ambition nor power could undo. The rivalry that had simmered for decades now erupted into a duel fought in every arena where power could be measured. William Kane and Abel Rosnovski no longer moved in parallel. They moved directly against one another, each decision calibrated to outmaneuver the other. For William, the battleground remained the bank. Every loan approved, every partnership forged, every alliance cultivated carried an undercurrent. Would it strengthen his defenses against Abel? He had once dismissed the hotelier as reckless, but no longer. Abel had proven himself, and William could not deny it, but acknowledgment did not soften his stance. If anything, it hardened his resolve. To protect the Kane name, he would not allow Rosnovski's empire to rise unchecked. Abel, on the other hand, had turned his feud into a creed. Every new hotel, every expansion, every victory was framed not merely as success, but as defiance of William Kane. He struck deals with Kane's rivals, financed ventures Kane refused, and wove a network of influence that extended far beyond lobbies and guest rooms. To the world, Abel was a visionary hotel magnate. To himself, he was a soldier in a private war. The two men became locked in a contest of endurance. When Kane blocked an avenue of financing, Abel found another, often at greater cost, simply to prove he could. When Abel expanded into new markets, William maneuvered to make credit scarce, choking his rivals' access to resources. Each move demanded a counter. Neither man spoke the other's name in public, but in private their lives revolved around the presence of the enemy. And yet the deeper their feud, the more alike they became. Both sacrificed peace of mind for pride. Both carried the weight of responsibility not just for themselves, but for the children who bore their names. Both believed with absolute certainty that they were right, and that the other was the obstacle destiny had placed before them. Richard and Florentina, caught in the crossfire, felt the toll most acutely. Their love, genuine and unyielding, became a secret battlefield. Each family's disapproval was ironclad, yet the bond between them only grew stronger. They became the mirror of their father's stubbornness, but turned toward love instead of hatred. To William and Abel, however, their children's defiance was another front in their private war, another wound inflicted by the enemy's existence. Boardrooms, courts, newspapers, and homes all became extensions of the duel. Decades of bitterness crystallized into a long, grinding struggle, as if the world itself were too small to contain two men so fiercely determined never to bow. The long duel defined them. Neither could remember a time when the other had not loomed in his mind. It was no longer just about hotels or banks, wealth or reputation. It was about proving, finally and absolutely, who would stand taller at the end. The years pressed onward, and with them came the slow erosion of youth. William Kane and Abel Rosnovski, once young men aflame with ambition, grew older. Their hair silvered, their shoulders bent with the weight of decades, but their pride did not soften. If anything, it sharpened, as if age itself demanded a reckoning. William, now the elder statesman of finance, still carried himself with the quiet authority that had defined his career. The Kane and Cabot Bank stood firm, its reputation unshaken, a monument to his discipline and foresight. Yet beneath the polished image was a man haunted by years of conflict. He had fought Abel at every turn, had denied him again and again, and though the world praised his prudence, William could not shake the gnawing question. Had his feud blinded him to truth? Abel, too, bore the scars of time. His empire of hotels had spread across continents, each one a jewel in the crown he had built from nothing. He walked the lobbies with the pride of a man who had defied fate itself. Yet in the quiet hours when he sat alone, memories returned. The hunger of his childhood, the brutality of war, the humiliation of being denied, all of it still lived within him. And at the center of that long, smoldering anger stood William Kane. Neither man could let go. Even as their bodies weakened, their rivalry endured. It was no longer about money. Both had more than they or their families could ever spend. It was not even about legacy, for both had children who would carry their names into the future. It was about pride, about proving that the other had been wrong all along. Their children, now grown, lived with the heavy inheritance of hatred. Richard and Florentina's love persisted, but it bore the weight of their father's enmity. To them, the feud felt like a chain binding two families to a past neither could escape. And yet William and Abel clung to it, as if letting go would mean surrendering the very core of their identities. Old age did not bring wisdom, only urgency. Every meeting, every maneuver, every whispered rumor of the other man's decline carried new intensity. It was as if both believed that outliving the other would be the final victory. But life, in its quiet cruelty, had other plans. Both men found themselves forced to confront mortality, not as conquerors but as men. The heart that had carried William through decades of discipline now faltered. The body that had borne Abel through wars and toil now ached with reminders of time's power. They had fought their duel for a lifetime, but the end approached, indifferent to their pride. And in those final years the question lingered, unspoken but insistent. Had they gained the world only to lose the peace that might have come from forgiveness? The stage was set for the reckoning neither man had wanted, but both had always known must come. The end did not arrive with fanfare, but with the quiet weight of inevitability. William Kane and Abel Rosnovski, bound together by a rivalry that had spanned their entire lives, faced the twilight of their years with pride still unbroken. Yet time, impartial and relentless, began to strip away the illusions both had clung to. For Abel, the years of hatred had become almost indistinguishable from purpose. He had told himself his empire was built for his daughter, for Florentina, and in many ways it was true. But deep inside he knew that every hotel, every deal, every sleepless night had also been a battle cry against William Kane. His victories were sharpened by defiance, his failures magnified by the thought of Kane's shadow. As he sat in the grand lobbies he had built, surrounded by marble and chandeliers, Abel could not help but wonder, had his obsession been his greatest strength, or his greatest chain? William, too, wrestled with truths he could no longer ignore. His bank stood firm, his family secure. Yet when he looked back across the years, he saw Abel's face as often as his own reflection. Every decision that had seemed prudent, every refusal justified in the name of caution, had also been fueled by something deeper. Pride, rivalry, the refusal to yield to a man he considered dangerous. In the end, had he been defending his institution or simply his ego? The final act of their long struggle came not in the boardroom or the marketplace, but in a moment of revelation. Abel, old and weary, discovered the truth he had never expected. William Kane had not been his enemy alone. He had also been his benefactor. Long ago, when Abel's empire teetered on the edge of ruin, it was Kane's quiet intervention, hidden, discreet, that had ensured his survival. The man he had hated most had also in secret ensured his rise. The revelation struck Abel like a thunderclap. For years he had poured his soul into a war that, at its heart, had been waged against a man not so different from himself. Both had been fathers, both had carried burdens too heavy, both had been driven by wounds carved in youth. They had been enemies, yes, but also mirrors. When William Kane's life came to its close, Abel stood in silence, the weight of truth pressing on him. He did not shout, did not curse. He simply bowed his head, acknowledging at last the bond that had defined them both. Hatred had been their language, rivalry their bond, but beneath it all lay a respect neither had ever spoken aloud. For Florentina and Richard, the feud ended not with bitterness but with understanding. Their love endured, their families intertwined, and in their union the long war between Cain and Abel found its resolution. The children had succeeded where their fathers had failed. They had chosen love over pride, forgiveness over rivalry, and so the circle closed. Two boys born on the same day, in worlds oceans apart, one to wealth, the other to poverty, had spent their lives in battle, only to discover at the end how deeply their fates had always been entwined. It was not victory that defined them, nor defeat. It was the struggle itself, the relentless pursuit of destiny, and the strange, unlikely understanding that emerged at the very end, at the very end, at the very end, at the very